Welcome to Talk+Water, the podcast that takes a deep dive into the world of water with those making waves. My name is Todd Votteler, and I'm your host for Talk+Water. I'm also the principal of Collaborative Water Resolution, which you can find at waterdisputes.org. And in addition, I'm editor-in-chief of Texas+Water and the Texas+Water Journal. Both publications are free. My guest today is Kevin Kluge. Kevin is the Water Conservation Manager for Austin Water, where he oversees a range of water conservation programs, which include incentives, irrigation evaluations, commercial efficiency assessments, and water waste enforcement. Prior to coming to Austin Water, Kevin spent 20 years at the Texas Water Development Board, where he rose to the position of Director of Conservation and Innovative Water Technologies. Kevin, thank you for being a guest on Talk+Water today.
Well, thank you, Todd. I'm happy to be here.
So I always ask every new guest, what motivated you to devote your career to water, or when did you kind of know that you wanted to spend the rest of your career working on water?
Sure. Well, I grew up in Nebraska. I'm not a native Texan, but I grew up in Nebraska, land of plentiful groundwater. And after going to college, I went into the Peace Corps and spent 2 years on a Pacific island teaching English. But the host family that we were with, the water supply was from rainwater catchment, which was handy because that island often got between 200 and 400 inches of rain. So it was a really rainy place, and those rainwater catchments could fill up pretty quickly. But it wasn't necessarily uncommon to go several months without significant rainfall. And if that's your source, then those rainwater catchment tanks can go down pretty quickly. So it really made an impact on me on the use of water and when you had a limited supply. I came back to the States, went to grad school for natural resource economics, learning to put numbers to environmental resources, and then came to Texas. I started with the Texas Water Development Board about 20 years ago, just over 20 years ago. My initial job was to estimate the economic impacts of water shortages as the regional water planning process really got going. So I was there for 20 years, and throughout that time, I did the economic impact modeling, worked a lot in projections, both population projections and water demand projections, collected water use information from the water utilities across the state, and then, as you noted, ended up in the Conservation Innovative Water Technologies Division, which worked a lot with municipal and agricultural water conservation, as well as brackish groundwater. So, one of the things that I really took away from that time with the Texas Water Development Board is, one, first of all, the importance of metrics, putting numbers to water, how much you're going to use, how much you're going to have, and that was a real cornerstone of the regional water planning process. But also, when dealing with projections, it really made a big impact on me on just how much a little bit of change at the beginning of your projections made to that curve going out 50 years. If you don't start that curve moderating early on, it continues pretty high. And then it's a lot tougher to moderate that use. So I would say that between the time in the Peace Corps working with water catchment tanks and consuming water that way, and the time with the Texas Water Development Board, that's really had a great impact on my life and really kind of pointed me here to Austin Water, where I think I can make a big impact on implementing these water efficiency measures.
Those projections that you're talking about, there's a lot of focus on those now because, people are thinking about, the needs of the state over the next 50 years, the new state water plan and all the folks moving to Texas, and how much money is going to be needed to provide the water that those folks are going to need. And those projections are, one of the ways you see them used is people talk about, we have another repeat of the drought of record, the worst drought we've got, detailed records for here in Texas, and we don't provide, the water that's needed, here's the impact. And, wow, those numbers look big off in the future. So good motivator.
Yes, indeed.
So let's talk about what you're doing here at Austin Water. Full disclosure, I live in Austin and I'm a customer of Austin Water. And several months ago, I saw somebody out in my front yard and I went out there to see what they're doing, and they were installing my smart meter. And I got really excited, the way only a water geek would get excited about this, right? That I was now going to have, real metering of my water use. And so that process is I guess still underway, and you're not finished yet, but tell us about that whole program, and what you will be able to do with that data, and what homeowners can do, and how far along you are.
Right. So Austin Water started the kind of full-scale deployment of this AMI, or automated metering infrastructure, essentially smart meters, back in 2021. And we've been installing them throughout the community, about 2,000 meters a week. So we're about halfway done, a little more than halfway done, but we still have quite a ways to go. But it's really proving to be an exciting tool for the utility and customers. Austin Water has the traditional methods of water conservation. We have public education, outreach. We have incentive programs to help give money to people for doing particular water saving things. And we have some ordinances, some requirements, water schedule. So we have really those three legacy types of water conservation activities. But I think there's a couple very exciting things on the horizon in terms of water conservation. I think I'd call them the emerging water conservation measures. One of them being these smart meters. When you have that information for the customer to read their meter hourly, in Austin Water's case, and they can view it about a day after it actually happened. But also for the water utility in terms of engaging. This is, I think, will be a really new paradigm for water utilities and their customers, the ability to engage with customers individually. For instance, one of the big things, a big thing that's beneficial to customers is the leak notice. You can sign up for that, and the smart meter application has a particular algorithm that it uses to detect leaks over a certain period of time and a certain flow, and it'll send you an alert and letting you correct that leak, or fix that leak, or turn the water off until you can. But also, we've instituted last year a high-tier leak alert. Now, Austin Water has, like many utilities around the state, they have a graduated tier rate. So, you use 2,000 gallons, that'll cost you a certain amount of money. But as you go up using more and more water, it'll cost you much, much more. And our third tier increases the price quite a bit. So we have an algorithm in our system that looks at the customer's use in the first 8 days of their billing cycle, and then is able to project upward. And if it sees that projection goes up into the third tier, which adds a hefty price both for a set price and the price per 1,000 gallons, it will notify the customers for that and say,
That's
hey,
great.
You can keep doing what you're doing if you want, just letting you know that you're going to be up into that third tier. And we've seen that even, we only have half the people on the smart meters, but we're able to see, since running this since last year, that it does have a big effect, that most of those customers who receive those notifications lessen their water use below what was projected, saving them money, but also saving water. So those are just two of the types of engagement that we've started using with that AMI system, and there's a lot more potential as we build out and as the utility and staff become more knowledgeable and experienced with using AMI that we can engage the customers with.
So it sounds like maybe you have, another year or two before you've got them all in place?
Yeah, I'd probably say 2 years. If we put in 50,000, 70,000 meters a year, I'd probably say a little more than a year, maybe less than 2 years.
Okay. Other major cities in Texas doing this yet, or?
San Antonio Water System has just started, and I think they're really leaning into it as a tool for their water utility. Other smaller, mid-sized cities have implemented this. Either they're just starting, or they're halfway, or some even have built out their system with AMI. So it's definitely an emerging tool for water utilities.
Yeah. One thing I like about it is, you prior to having that, you just get your bill, at the end of the month, and then you'd see what would happen, right? And so now you're kind of, engaged more or less, if needed, on a daily or weekly basis in managing your own water at home, which is, for somebody who's excited about water like we are, that's a pretty cool thing.
Right, and it really gives people a better picture of how they use water.
Yeah.
As you're saying, you only get a bill once a month, and you may get a bill in August and say, how could I have used that much water?
Yeah.
To result in this bill. And now customers can go on and say, oh, okay, that's where I used it.
Yeah. So it's very timely too, because we are in a drought, and we are, getting into the spring when we're expecting, the big, peak. Well, we have two peaks, right? Rainfall peaks in Texas, kind of, May, early June, and then kind of into September, October. And it's been pretty dry outside, and I'm sure you are watching the lakes and aquifers in the region, especially the ones that supply water to Austin. And so why don't you kind of give us a snapshot of where we are in terms of the drought situation?
Sure. At this point, Austin Water the city of Austin, gets their water from the Highland Lakes, Lake Buchanan and Lake Travis. So when we talk about the supply of Austin, we're really talking about the combined storage of those two reservoirs. And at this particular point, the combined storage is 51%, or about just over 1 million acre feet. When they're full, it's 2 million acre feet. So we have about half of that storage in there. Last year was a hot and dry year. We were in stage 1 throughout that year. They had release for rice at the beginning of the summer, but they did not do it later in the summer because of that hot, dry summer and low inflows. And one of the things to really that we're aware of, that we keep an eye on, is the amount of inflows going into those reservoirs. And over the last year, a little more than a year actually, the inflows into those reservoirs have been very, very low. So we can be aware of how hot and dry it is here in Austin, but what's really important for those reservoirs is how hot and dry it is upstream into the counties to the west and the north of us here in Austin. And that inflow was a record low inflow in 2022. And it has not been any better since January.
Yeah.
Now, as you mentioned, we'll see in April and May, particularly May, if we get a big rain bomb or what have you. But so far, the trend for those inflows is not any better this year so far than it was last year. It's been less, and that was a record low inflow.
So you mentioned this, the rice farmers. So just so that everybody is up to speed on this, water from the Highland Lakes, if there is enough in Travis and Buchanan, water is released downstream below Austin to rice farmers that are near the coast. And this year, the LCRA, the Lower Colorado River Authority, who manages these reservoirs, had determined that there was not enough water released for downstream rice irrigation. And so, obviously a major impact for downstream users of that water, but it reflects the ongoing drought situation here. So, we were talking about this a little bit before we started. The drought monitor's got a big bullseye just south of Austin that I think is still in exceptional drought. And I was just down there a few days ago at Jacob's Well in Hays County, the well in the Trinity Aquifer, which has really been impacted. But we're feeling it up here too.
Yeah, we definitely are, particularly to the west of Austin. And when those areas dry out, any rainfall up there, even less of it gets down into the reservoirs. So it's somewhat of a circular thing on that. So it's a little bit deceptive though. If you live in Austin, you're driving around. We're having a great wildflower year. I mean, the wildflowers started and have been going on for almost a month now, it seems like. We had bluebonnets and firewheel and Indian paintbrush and the whole gambit. And I was driving up here and I was just like, I try to keep my eyes on the road, but you're coming to all these patches of great wildflowers, and I think of that and I wonder, the citizens of Austin, really, they realize, yet that we're still in a drought, even though we've gotten enough rain to make a difference in terms of wildflowers, but not really enough to make a dent in the hydrologic drought. How much water is in aquifers and reservoirs, and so that's probably got to be a challenge for y'all to make sure everybody remembers, hey, we're still in a drought. Right, particularly as it's starting to get warmer. It's not the blistering 100-degree days, but it is starting to get warmer, and people are getting out and about, working in the yard, starting to turn on the irrigation systems. So that is a challenge. When it's still pleasant out here, you don't think of it as a blistering drought. So you might be willing to use more water around the yard or turn on the irrigation system, get things green and growing. So that is a challenge.
And it's already been, we're here, it's the 4th or 5th of April, and we've already had a couple of days in the 90s. It's going to cool off, though, which is good, and maybe get a little bit more rain. But are y'all projecting, drought conditions throughout the rest of summer? What are your kind of modeling and plans telling you for the rest of the year?
Well, we really rely on the Lower Colorado River Authority, the wholesaler, and the ones who manage those reservoirs to do the projections for the combined storage. And they do those monthly. We should be having one come out maybe by the end of this week. But the most recent one, which came out beginning of March, shows that under dry or extremely dry conditions, the combined storage would be going down and hitting what we have as stage 2 drought, 900,000 acre feet, in June or July. So, granted, some meteorologists point out that we're kind of leaving the La Nina cycle, which is the dry weather pattern. But if we don't get a lot in May, it's very likely we'll be continuing along those dry or exceptionally dry lines and entering stage 2 drought in June or July. And we all know that regardless of La Nina or La Nina, El Nino, what have you, it's usually pretty dry in Austin, Texas, hot and dry in the summertime. So it's highly likely that unless we get a lot of rain in May, that we'll be going down into that stage 2 drought. And if not, we'll still be in stage 1 for quite a while.
So if anybody wants to look at those issues in more detail, Texas+Water has a section called Outlook+Water that catalogs all that and has an analysis from Dr. Robert Mace. I've always, get worried when we get into May and we start getting fronts and they're dry. To me, that's always like, okay, this is not good. We're really drying out, and it's getting warm, and our opportunities for lots of rain are diminishing. When you get into the beginning of June, all that, and so that's how I'm always like really worried about drought that time of year, because we're expecting significant amount of rainfall to help replenish aquifers and reservoirs, and we may or may not get it. But you've got to anticipate. I would think you have to kind of plan like we're not going to get it. We're in conditions where people are having to conserve, and you're encouraging the public to do that. But you can't assume that it's going to happen. You have to kind of assume that it's not going to happen, right?
Right. And within Austin Water, we're starting to look at if we go into stage 2 in June or July, and what has to happen before that. We have a drought contingency plan like all water utilities across the state, but that's really just a framework of what could happen, of ordinances. But it doesn't dive specifically down into specific actions that the staff and utilities have to take. So we're starting to look at that on if we need to bring in more people on a temporary basis to help with water patrols, or look at other ways to incentivize water-saving measures before that. So we're considering that because we only have 3 months or so until that time where we may be going into stage 2 drought.
Right. And one of the lessons from the last big drought, I guess it's 2010 to 15, was landscape water use, and I may be wrong, but now Austin decided to keep the once a week watering, right?
Right.
And I thought, boy, that was a smart idea, a smart thing to do. A lot of the big cities in Texas didn't, which really disappointed me. But so you've already got in place, kind of the water conservation mindset, since we're asking people just to water on one day, depending on what their address is, right?
Right. And that made a big difference in the water use of Austin. That 1 day a week watering in 2011, the per person water use was 162. And then by 2016, it had gone down to the mid 120s.
Wow.
So it's had a big impact instituting that 1 day a week watering and keeping it. But one of the things I think we need to realize as a community and water utility is that it's been hovering really around that 120. We haven't continued to go down towards goals that we have beyond that. So one of the things that we have to consider is that what got us here may not get us there. We can't just sit on our laurels of 1 day a week watering, but need to look at other methods.
Well, let's talk about those. What are some of the other programs you have to reduce water use? And we've been talking a lot about landscape water use here, but you've got other areas where water can be conserved in Austin. So why don't you tell us a little bit about some of those other programs you have?
Sure, there are a number of other things besides just the 1 day a week watering. Certainly we have incentives for people to replace grass or to put on pool covers or to institute laundry to landscape systems. So we have a myriad of those. But we also have a number of commercial regulatory systems to compel commercial facilities to be as efficient as they can with their irrigation systems or their car washes or their cooling towers also. But I think where we really have opportunities to move forward is with this AMI system, as I mentioned. The leak alerts from last year estimated to save 90 million gallons. And that's just on a partial deployment.
Right.
And the high leak alerts estimated to save 70 million gallons, also just on a partial deployment. So those are things that I think we're really going to have to be leaning into in terms of saving water, not just on a drought year, but every year going forward. And then we're also looking at a strategy in the Water Forward Plan called landscape transformation. We work a lot with existing homeowners and their irrigation systems and helping them tune those up through incentives or helping them remember that there's watering schedules. But the Water Forward Plan, going out 100 years, is looking forward. And one of the strategies, the near-term strategies, is landscape transformation. How to make the landscapes of new homes, and we have a lot of new homes. 100 people move into town a day. How to make landscapes in those new homes even more efficient than existing homes. So that's what we're working on and be working to implement this year, is how to do that through a number of different measures, how to make the newcomers be even more efficient than those of us who are here now.
So, I think about this a lot because my wife and I have discussed this many times about removing most of our lawn, which we have zoysia, right? So it's drought tolerant, but I wouldn't mind having less. And there's always kind of this discussion about, well, are people going to want houses that have that kind of landscaping? I mean, I think they will. I mean, I like, the kind of drought-proof landscaping, xeriscaping, that I see people do now. And, I would think that, there are enough people who are looking for a home and say, hey, well, this home, by the way, is going to cost us less in terms of our water bill because they've already put in xeriscaping or whatever. So I'm just curious, what do you hear from builders? Are they amenable to this? Do they get that, or are they kind of more in the mode that you got to sell something, you really need to have a great big green lawn in front of it?
The builders that we've talked to over this last year regarding landscape transformation have not had a strong opinion about that. Now, they may, but by the time we get done, they may have some very strong opinions they convey to us. But up at this point, they seem open to meeting the customer's needs within the framework that we give them. Certainly those water-efficient landscapes can look very nice in terms of beds, replacing turf. Or even you could still have turf, but use a very water-efficient type of grass there. So I think that it can be done well. I think we can be building with success for these new homes, building with savings in terms of landscapes. And if they do put an irrigation system into these homes, our goal going forward is to make that irrigation system the very best that it can be from the day, from the day one. So I think there's a lot of upsides to this landscape transformation, and I think the few downsides I think can be mitigated.
So you mentioned something earlier, laundry to lawn, and so can you explain a little bit about what that is?
Right, laundry to landscape is essentially using water from your clothes washer and putting it onto your landscape. Now it's not going to water your entire lawn. You're not going to be able to spray it all out, and you're going to have to be cognizant of the type of detergents that you use when diverting this. It's a relatively simple system located within the house that lets you send it to the sanitary sewer, where it usually goes, or you can divert it outside your house to generally a subsurface irrigation system. So a single-family home, typical single-family home with a washer, probably could water several beds with this, maybe several trees also, as a way to water that landscape. Now, historically, there's not been a lot of utilization of laundry to landscape because it is challenging in an existing house to add these pipes through the wall and get that all set up. I'm doing it myself at this point. I have to admit, it's going a lot longer.
Oh, you put it in your own home?
I'm working on it.
Okay.
You know, I got the permit, I got the materials, and it's just taking a while. So it's tough to do it on an existing home. Whereas new homes, one of the things we're looking at is to require for new homes that have clothes washers on an exterior wall or near an exterior wall to include those pipes for a laundry to landscape. Not the irrigation ones out in the landscape, but simply the pipe that diverts the water outside. Now, when you're building the house, that's a pretty simple and pretty cheap change to make, as opposed to after the house is built. So we're hoping to use that in new homes as a substitute for using our highly treated drinking water on the landscape.
What about rainwater harvesting? Do y'all have any programs related to that?
Right. Rainwater harvesting is one of our most historical, long-standing, and most popular programs to incentivize customers to buy rainwater harvesting tanks to use on their landscape, as opposed to the potable water, as I was mentioned.
Right.
As we go forward, and as we build houses with either less irrigation or more efficient irrigation that may not be throughout the entire lot, rainwater harvesting tanks and laundry and landscape can be a great substitute for those areas that we're not irrigating with our drinking water.
So, kind of looking out long term, you mentioned the 100-year plan. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Right. There's a water forward plan. It was approved back in 2018, the first version of the plan. It's being updated now. Should be approved in 2024, next year. It's a plan that receives a lot of community input, both with a particularly task force of individuals appointed by council members, but they're really doing a good job this year reaching out to the community, particularly parts of the community that traditionally are not involved in water planning. They're doing a good job with that. But as you mentioned, they're looking out 100 years, looking at situations where it may be much worse than the drought of record.
Right.
So they're really looking at a whole cone of different potential futures and planning for that. And one of the key aspects of that water forward plan is that it does not include bringing in water from outside. We're not going to be pumping groundwater from neighboring counties to meet our needs. One of the cornerstones of that plan is that we'll be living within our means and using water most innovatively we can to supply our future needs.
Well, that's great. There's one water conflict after another. People trying to develop large supplies and move them a great distance, and whatever your ability is, if you can stretch what you have, now, you're just so much better off in terms of not only your ability to get a project done, but it's just cheaper and faster to do as well. And so that's great to know. And that plan is being updated every 5 years, like the state water plan is. And it sounds like y'all, you're looking at droughts worse than the drought of record. That's great. That's I've been encouraging people to do that. Having done a tree ring study to see that. Yeah, there are droughts, out there that were a lot worse than drought record. And so how does that work? Well, I'm just curious about that. Do you take a historical hydrology of the drought record and say, hey, what if it was like, a few years longer, or maybe 10% drier, or how's that work?
I have to tell you, Todd, you're out of my depth already. I wish I could tell you how we're looking at those. But
that's another
there
podcast.
Are smart people. Yeah, there are smart people who could tell you that on another podcast. But one of the things I think it's important to remember is we have these historical records, going back on whether it's tree rings or what the LCRA keeps records of. But I think a lot of people would acknowledge that climate is a-changing.
Yeah.
Times are a-changing. The amount of water that may be flowing into those reservoirs may be changing due to the additional population and groundwater pumping upstream of them. So there's a lot of unknown variables going forward.
So, Kevin, why don't we kind of wrap up with, how people can find out more about Austin Water and what they can do to reduce their water use?
Sure. I'd say, first of all, if you're in Austin, go to austinwater.org and check out our rebates, our incentives, our education materials, but also sign up for the MyATX Water portal. That's our smart meter portal.
Okay.
If you currently have a smart meter, you'll be able to see your use hourly every day. If you don't have a smart meter yet, you'll be set up for when you do get a smart meter, and you'll be able to receive those leak alerts and high tier alerts. After that, I would say if you have an irrigation system, this is the time to be tuning up that irrigation system, because nothing can throw out water like an irrigation system, particularly one that has leaks or that is not very well maintained. But then also be planning forward and assuming that we're going to be having a hot, dry summer, because odds are we will have a hot, dry summer. And particularly in your landscape, what you might want to be planting or what you might want to replace to have the most efficient landscape going forward.
And I guess mulching too, or something like that.
Mulching, aerating, adding compost to your soil, making sure you have a good soil to hold water in their soil for the plants.
Well, so sounds like, one of the bottom line messages is everybody get ready, because, here comes summer.
Yes. And if it turns out to be a rainy May, well, then you're in good shape.
Right. Well, we'll be prepared for the next drought, because we've gone through all these steps. But I don't know if we'll be that lucky or not. Well, Kevin, thank you again for being on Talk+Water. Really enjoyed getting together with you and learning more about all the things that Austin Water is doing.
Well, very good. Thank you, Todd, for having me.
So my guest today was Kevin Kluge. Kevin is the Water Conservation Manager at Austin Water, where he oversees a range of water conservation programs, including incentives, irrigation evaluations, commercial efficiency assessments, and water waste enforcement. I want to thank you, the listener, for also being with us today and spending half an hour of your time listening to this podcast. And I want to thank Anna Huff for getting each one of our podcasts ready to flow. This has been Talk+Water. I'm your host, Todd Votteler. Let's talk water again soon.